With the authority of the Council, I shall now confer the degree of Doctor of the University. I call upon the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Roy Webb, to make the presentation.
Chancellor, the Council of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to Dr. Germaine Greer. Germaine Greer was born in Melbourne in 1939 and educated at the Star of the Sea Convent at Garden Vale in Victoria. A gifted student, she was the recipient of a number of academic scholarships during her teenage years. At the tertiary level, she graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Bachelor of Arts in 1959, obtaining first-class honours in English. She moved to the University of Sydney, where she gained an MA with honours in 1962 and tutored in English in 1963 and 1964. Further study included a PhD from Cambridge University in 1967, followed by a period of lecturing at the University of Warwick from 1967 to 1972. It was her landmark publication of The Female Eunuch in 1969 that launched Germaine Greer as a dominant voice in Western culture. As well as topping the bestseller lists in the United States and Britain, the book sold over 90,000 copies in 2 weeks in Australia. The Female Eunuch stands as one of the classic publications of the women's liberation movement and has been influential in setting the parameters of feminist debate. The significance of this work was acknowledged in 1995 when the Sunday Telegraph in London named Germaine Greer as author of one of the 10 most influential books of the 20th century. She was the only Australian writer to receive such an accolade and one of only 2 women included in the list. Since the success of her first book, Germaine Greer has been a consistently passionate advocate of the rights of women. From 1972 to 1979, she worked as a freelance journalist, writing for the Sunday Times and contributing to such periodicals as Listener, Spectator, Oz, Rolling Stone and Esquire. Her diverse writing talents are still in great demand today, with regular contributions to The Guardian and a range of other publications, such as the street paper for the homeless, The Big Issue. In addition to her career in print medium, Germaine Greer has had a significant impact through British television. She has made numerous appearances on television, TV chat shows, and in public debates on controversial issues, and recently presented a series of late-night talk shows, The Last Word, for BBC TV. As broadcaster, columnist, critic, journalist and reviewer, she has played a major role in challenging familiar notions within our culture. Over the last 25 years, Germaine Greer has remained in the forefront of social analysis. She has undertaken systematic research on the constraints imposed on women artists, The Obstacle Race, 1979, and on the conditions that govern women's reproduction, Sex and Destiny, The Politics of Human Fertility, 1984. Her other works include The Mad Woman's Underclothes, Essays and Occasional Writings, 1968 to 1985, published in 1986. Kissing the Rod, an anthology of 17th century women's verse, 1988. Daddy, We Hardly Knew You, 1989, and The Change, Women, Ageing and the Menopause, 1991. Germaine Greer's work has often shadowed her own life experiences, and she has used these personal insights not only to encourage open discussion and increase public awareness, but also to offer understanding to others in similar situations. The very nature of this work has led her to be labelled as radical, outspoken and provocative. More importantly, she is a brilliant and lucid social commentator. Germaine Greer is also deeply committed to the pursuit of academic excellence. She was the founding director of the Tulsa Center for the Study of Women's Literature in Oklahoma during the early 1980s and has held a number of teaching positions in England and the United States. Since 1989, she has been a special lecturer and unofficial fellow of Newnham College, Cambridge. Her current involvement with the Association of Independent Schools of Australia is an example of her continuing interest in education in this country. It is especially fitting that the Council of Griffith University should honour Germaine Greer in recognition of her many contributions to scholarship and the international community. Chancellor, it is with great pleasure that I present to you Germaine Greer for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University.
I now call upon Dr. Germaine Greer, Doctor of the University, to deliver the occasional address.
I was going to say ladies and gentlemen, and I realised how stupid it is. We don't really use these distinctions anymore, I hope. And when I talk to you, you'll see why. Because they have a specific meaning. I want to say something different, like brothers and sisters, or fellow members of the academic body that I've just joined, and their friends and relatives and all the other people here. I'd like to explain to you something about why I have found this evening an extraordinarily moving experience. And it's partly to do with the fact that I have all my life been deeply involved in elitist education. And let me tell you how elitist education works. The point of elitist education is to exclude people, because elites have to be small. You can't have a big elite by definition. So elites are particularly merciless in keeping their number small. The elite is the necessary matrix for an oligarchy, the rule of the few. Now, of course, when you're at school trying to do your best, you're not really conscious of what happens to other people. And you very early get the idea that you're doing well and being ducks of the school because you deserve it. It's a very seductive idea, and that's one reason why you won't find people who are members of oligarchies condemning the system by which they got there. But I'm perhaps a little bit different in this, because I was always a teacher, and I was very aware when I taught at girls' high schools in the suburbs of Sydney, or girls' grammar schools or convent schools, that the system was terribly unjust. That it was giving people the idea, very early on when they were still very small, that they were failures. That what I was involved in was a culture of failure. I did my best to break it down when I was teaching by trying to imply that my E stream, who are supposed to be impenetrably stupid, just were not verbal, that they had all kinds of skills, and that my job as an educator was to draw out of them the talents they had, not to continually impress upon them every day the lack of talent that was assumed to be the case. And so I did something rather naughty with their dossiers we used to have on them. I managed to lose them, so that their IQs became a matter of conjecture ever after, which can only be a good thing, I think. You have to forgive me, it was a piece of direct action which was thoroughly unprofessional, but I was only a supply teacher at the time. And that's what you get when you have education departments that rely on untrained supply teachers. Again, not always a bad thing. And then, of course, I went on to become a university teacher, and I went to Cambridge. I won a Commonwealth Scholarship. And all the time I was flying along, trying to get into the very top echelons of the elite, dimly aware that they weren't too pleased with the fact that I was of the wrong gender, which was particularly apparent when I got to Cambridge. But the real iniquity of the system didn't strike me until I was a teacher myself at Warwick University, and I had to examine university entrance forms. And they had already been through some sort of clearinghouse, but when I got them, I was only allowed to suggest one candidate in 13 for interview. Now, if you think about the maths, there weren't enough differentials to make that just. It would have been juster if we'd said that everybody could come who got 3 A's or 2 A's and a B or something like that. But instead we played God, and we read these rambling accounts of the students' behavior with the headmaster's comments, long hair, undisciplined, and so on. And what made it even more haphazard was that I would go for them. I would think they'd be good at a university, but the chap sitting next to me would go for short back and sides and a boy every time. So that a situation that was already unjust, in the way that we carried it out, became completely random. It would have been more just if we'd said only redheads need apply to this university. And it got to the stage where I couldn't bear it, because I knew, meeting other people outside the university, that people who had fell at the many hurdles, any of the many hurdles set in their way, whether it was the 11 plus or their GCEs or their A-levels, I'm talking about the English system, always thought that it was because they were no good. It never occurred to them to question the system. And it was particularly hurtful when you met people who said, I wasn't good enough to get into university. And I would think, what would you believe me if I tried to explain to you that being good enough has absolutely nothing to do with it? What kind of an uproar would there have been if the system had been exposed for what it is, and I think, alas, still continues to be, even though we've had an enormous expansion in tertiary education and we have absorbed the polytechnics into the university structure, the basic inequity in the system is still there. And so it was tremendously exciting for me to realize that yet again, in Australia, somebody had had a good idea. And that was to set up a university which took as its duty the duty of accessibility, which took very seriously the idea that you taught people what they wanted to know, instead of demanding that they wear some kind of academic straitjacket and study proper subjects. In my universities, it was difficult even to get cross-discipline between, say, Italian and English literature. That would have taken an act of parliament at the time that I was trying to do it. Now that situation has changed, but nowhere has it changed more radically than at Griffith, as I saw this evening. You didn't see, perhaps as I did, the joy on the faces of the graduates, which is really what the name of the game is. Actually, there was a bit of sex differentiation there, which I found very interesting. The chaps were all trying to be really tough and not show that they felt any joy at all. And just a certain trembling of the cheeks gave the situation away occasionally. But the women's faces were alight with pride and joy, very proper pride and joy. And if I have any misgiving about my doctorate of this university, it's possibly because I have a thought that I haven't really deserved it. Because the truth is, I am hooked on the elitist system. Now, I realize it's a bad thing, like heroin might be a bad thing. I love books and dusty libraries. I love reading 17th century manuscripts. I love poking and pottering around with my 17th century women poets. But I don't imagine for 1 minute that this activity is superior to any of the activities we've heard described tonight. In fact, it's a good deal less useful than looking at denitrification in soils, or looking at the nature of deposited dusts, or investigating valuable proteins. All these things have obvious applications. My women poets have some applications to women's history and women's pride in themselves, but they're a curious group of people. I just happen to be fascinated by them the way that other people are fascinated by stamps. And I don't think that any student who decides to come and work with me has made some kind of noble or superior decision. I am aware that my attachment to Cambridge is in the nature of a vice, a sort of addiction. I like college silver, I like the architecture, I even like university feasts. And you've got to imagine, they are so insane. You have to imagine all of us sitting there by candlelight as if electricity hadn't yet been invented, wearing our orders. You wear full canonicals to these things. So I might be sitting next to a bishop in gaiters with silver buckles and a purple stock, and on the other side a knight commander of the British Empire, remember that? With his jewelled pendant hanging at his neck. And on those occasions one wears one's full canonicals, and I shall be very pleased to wear the gown of Griffith University. And I can hear these people saying, "Oh, and what might that be? I don't think I've seen that gown before." And I shall say, "Well, this is the gown of Griffith University in Queensland, Australia, get it? This is black for the people, yellow for the sun, and red for the earth." And he will say to me, "Honoris causa, I presume," and I'll say, "Bet your life." So let me just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This is an honour. I shall treasure them more because I doubt that I really deserve it. Thank you so much.